Good morning, everybody. Welcome to February's meeting of the County Council Executive. Welcome to you all. So start with apologies for absence, please, Rachel.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor Mrs Bowkett and Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I think Mrs Barkett is on the screen, but not, she's not obviously present. Hopefully she's with us on screen. Okay, item 2 then. Any declarations of councillor interest, please? There are none, so move on to item 3 then. Any announcements by any of us? Nope. Thank you. Move on to item 4 there. The minutes of the meeting of this executive held on the 4th of January. Is it your wish I sign these as a true and accurate record? Is that agreed? Thank you. We move on to the one substantive item, important item of course, which is the council budget for the next financial year, and at this meeting we'll be recommending to the full council proposals for the next year. So I'll hand straight over to Andrew. Where's that? Andrew and Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, so very pleased to present the latest update that's been circulated around the room alongside Michelle. Fair to say that in line with the relatively late settlement that we received just before Christmas, there are still numerous changes going through the process, which Michelle will outline, and quite sizable in some places, so we'll try and bring some light to those. I was just going to reiterate some of the key messages that we talked about in January, if that was okay, Leader, just in terms of around the uncertainty, if that's helpful, just to refresh memories. So clearly we've been given a one-year settlement for 23-24 with an indicative position for 24-25. 25-26 onwards looks very uncertain in terms of our future funding package. Clearly there are a number of reasons for that around the outcomes of the next general election, the still to be completed fair funding review for local government funding, the full outcomes of the fair funding reforms for the cost of care. All have sizable potential impacts on us, but also some local circumstances as well, particularly around some of the uncertainties that we've got around longer term planning for our demand-led services, and Michelle will provide an update today on our work to date on the home to school transport, which has caused some considerable challenges over the past year at least. And some of the national influences as well in terms of the direction of travel from government. So the budget we're presenting has in excess of £60 million of cost pressures for next year. Certainly a once in a generation experience for us here in terms of the external economic impacts around inflation, cost of energy and what have you. And in doing so, the government signalled, a change in emphasis around council tax rates, allowing councils to set a maximum of 5% with an expectation that councils do take that in coming to the envelopes around the funding that they've provided us. Again, a generous settlement from government in terms of their support. But as I say, looking ahead, a uncertain picture from 25-26 includes, so hence the reason for some of the debate we've had today on the budget around council tax rates and what have you. So if that's okay to hand over to Michelle at that point, Leader, for the detail on the paper that's been handed around.
Thank you very much and good morning. So the report at page 13 in your report pack includes updates to the budgets proposed for consultation by the Exec on the 4th of January. And at the time of publishing this report, we were still waiting for the final figures from the district councils on the council tax and business rates, collection funds and tax bases. And we were also still assessing the cost pressure in relation to education transport. So we've now received that information, and that's included in the budget update paper that should be read alongside the published report. We've also updated Appendix F to the report, and that's been circulated to include the consultation feedback from the scrutiny committees, which were not in time to be included in the published report. So the 4th of January report included 3 options for council tax. These were options A, 2.99%, option B, 3.99%, and option C, 4.99%, which all included a 2% adult care precept. The final recommendation that's within the report includes a council tax increase of 4.99%, which will generate around an additional £7 million of funding compared to the increase of 2.99%. This recommendation is factored in the feedback on the desire to preserve council services, and that spend on highways and roads maintenance is a priority for the residents of Lincolnshire. So in response to this feedback, the report also includes an additional £7 million spend in 23-24 on highways, including spend on pedestrian crossings, footway works, network improvements and addressing traffic regulation orders. The original report also highlighted the evolving cost pressure around education transport, and more detail has been provided on this in the budget update paper. So paragraph 118 of the update provides details which anticipates an additional budget requirement of 9.4 million over the 3 million already included in the budget pressures for 23-24. This predominantly reflects the increased costs we are already experiencing in the contracts that are being let in the current year, and our proposal is to create a transport contingency of 9.4 million in the corporate budget area, so this area of spend can be closely monitored during 23-24 and the contingency drawn down as necessary. The update report also includes changes from the District Council's data. So in terms of council tax, the update report sets out the actual growth on tax base was slightly less than budgeted for, but the collection fund made a small surplus, which was greater than we had planned for, so given an overall increase on planned funding of around £100,000. In the business rates, the main change is the government application of CPI to government grant allocated to offset the decision to freeze the business rates multiplier, which creates an additional funding of 9.4 million. We'd also planned for a small deficit on the business rates collection fund, and actually it returned a small surplus. So that gives an overall increase in the funding for business rates of 10.2 million over what was planned for. The net effect of these changes is shown on Table E of the update report, and the table shows that after these changes we will need to draw down around 9.5 million from earmarked reserves to present a balanced budget for 23-24. We will look to utilise existing grant reserves to meet this service cost pressure where eligible spend will allow us to do so. There's no changes proposed in the latest report to the capital programme for those in the original 4th of January report. These figures are based on the government provisional settlement that was published before Christmas. The final settlement was published late yesterday, and we're currently working through the figures to identify any changes to the grants allocations. So the report recommendations will allow for the leader to make changes resulting in those final settlement figures ahead of budget papers being prepared for council on the 17th of February. So happy to take any questions or...
Thank you. Questions, comments then, please, ladies and gentlemen. Councillor Bradwell.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just to say that on listening to colleagues around the country, I think we are very lucky in Lincolnshire to be in the position we're in. We've had to make no drastic cuts to our services, and I just think, you know, this is it's a good budget, I think, in the circumstances, and obviously we're fortunate as well to be able to take money out reserves as well, which again a lot of places aren't. So, you know, I think officers and members have done very well in setting the budget, and obviously Michelle has highlighted the issues with regard to school transport and that, but again we all know the cost of fuel and rising the difficulty sometimes people have with keeping staff as well. So I think this is really a good budget for us, for Lincolnshire people.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask, while we're talking about, just have an explanation as these very substantial increases in homeschool transport cost pressures. So whether somebody can just talk a bit about that, please. Probably that's you, Andy, isn't it? What's going on and what's the problem?
Yeah, there's a range of issues which we continue to work collectively to understand and appreciate the drivers. As Councillor Bradwell's indicated, some of those issues are cost of living, inflationary pressures in respect of how the contractors are repricing. We built in quite a sophisticated model to understand the sort of impact of that, but the price level, we've got anecdotal information of sort of like rises of wages to entice drivers to stay in the sector, which is then reflected in the contract prices. There are other things which again are impacting in respect of the changes to expectations in terms of the requirements of individual children, A lot of that relates to the send agenda in terms of the impact there, and also increases in the number of passengers actually being eligible for the service. Since November, we've got evidence that we've got approximately, on average, 20 new passengers per day getting access to the service. So within our policy requirements at the moment, there is an increased demand, which is then having a bearing on the cost on the service. That's where, in terms of Michelle's comment in respect of actually keeping a close handle and understanding the impact of that, then with it being a contingency budget, we'll then be able to draw that down, because we may find that in those are not trends, they may actually be sort of a set of circumstances at a particular moment in time. But the evidence looking back is that obviously there's a volatility in the sector, and that then gets reflected through in the costs. It is something that's happening nationally. We've got evidence that this is happening to other authorities, and again, as Councillor Bradwell indicates, those other authorities are struggling even more than we are, even in this sector, to actually sort of balance the books.
Thank you. Councillor Corey?
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from what Andy's just said, yes, this puts us in a better position than we have been in the past, and the headline figures may make the situation in Lincolnshire look comfortable, but we still have a relatively low council tax base and business rates base. We have a large county to service, especially the highways, and we've just heard from Andy about the home to school transport. We've got a lot of rural communities to service. So while our budget settlement has been better than expected, I would support, at the moment, I would support the proposed or the recommended council tax increase, because now is the time where we can invest in all those things that we've wanted to invest in and not been able to do in the past. Thank you.
I'll ask Councillor Smith to come in now, as he's representing the Overview Scrutiny Committee, but also all the scrutiny comments, which are lots of them. So, Tom, I'll let you summarise what's come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. You've obviously had them, so I won't go through every single one on every single committee, because I know everyone has time, but there are a few where I wish to pick out from some of them. It is important to say that all scrutiny committees supported the proposed budget, but in respect of adults, I think there's a particular interesting one, and very important, especially with what's been said around homeschool transport and other pressures around the costs of care, which is that the committee suggested creating a mechanism for valuing the benefits of services provided, and I think that's important, because actually we need to know if we're A, providing the right service, and B, how valued is it by residents, so that we as a council can work out how best to use the resource that we've got, because obviously we would like more in an ideal world, but we're not living in an ideal world, so we have to cut our cloth accordingly, and I think that mechanism, if developed fully, will be vital to that process. In terms of children's, I think the biggest problem that children's will face, from a personal perspective, having sat on children's, is the government have changed their tune on the, I believe it was the Green Paper. So there's a lot of unknowns now of, based on the assumptions we made, that was based on the Green Paper, so something else could come forward either from this government or possibly whoever the next government is post 2025. So there's a lot that we don't know that's coming down the road, as it were. In respect of OSMB Leader, as has already been said, we're conscious that of the cost of living and the issues our residents face, but we're also conscious of the issues that we face as an authority, and we accept that the 5% rise is necessary if we want to continue to do the things we need to do, especially given the issues that have been now long-standing around the fairer funding review and the lack of the £12 million that was taken from our highways budget, which is something our residents always say to us as councillors. When's this pothole fixed? When's this pavement going to be repaired or reinstated or refurbished fully? So I think it's a necessary evil. I haven't got any more points unless there's anything anyone would wish to ask me, Chairman, because you've obviously had them and I don't wish to go through it verbatim.
Thank you very much for that. So perhaps we could just pick on the future pressures on children's services, and as I think, as Councillor Smith rightly said, I think some of the issues nationally have sort of not been addressed, shall we say, and particularly in SEN. So if we just have you know, in the future, you know, what are the pressures and what are the pressures we probably will have to account for in years to come.
Thank you.
As well
Thank you,
as this
Leader. So the pressures that we discussed at the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee that we know are going to be faced by children revolve around the placements for children in care. We know that the market for children in care placements is becoming increasingly difficult, and as it gets more tightly regulated, we know we're seeing providers who are reluctant to work with some of our most challenging children, which means the placement choice we have around some of those children is really restricted and very expensive. We've done an awful lot to try and mitigate that impact in Lincolnshire. So we've opened 2 new children's homes this year so that we can place within our own children's homes, but that will continue to be a pressure for us undoubtedly. The pressures we've got around workforce and agency workers, I think, is going to be very challenging. So making sure we retain our workforce within our permanent workforce staff at a time when agency work is extremely profitable for individual social workers. Again, we've seen some national developments come out. There was a consultation launched last week to try and tackle the impact of the agency market on different local authorities. And also Lincolnshire has minimised the impact that's had by some of the controls we've taken throughout of the year to ensure that Lincolnshire's a competitive place to be a social worker. The SEND area, as you've mentioned, is a significantly challenging one. We're seeing nationally an increase in the proportion of children who are not educated in mainstream schools and who are moved into specialist provision. Again, we've worked really hard in Lincolnshire to ensure that our schools are as inclusive of children with SEND as possible and that those children can thrive in mainstream settings. But we've also seen the rise that's been seen nationally of children with EHCPs and children requiring those specialist settings. Again, Lincolnshire invested early in this. We expanded our special school estate and we ensured that our special schools were able to meet a broader range of need within the local area. But that is going to continue to be a challenge for us and we need to see continued capital investment in the special school estate nationally in order for us to be able to continue to meet that need.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think there's a national meeting last week and quite clearly there is a big black hole now with SEND. As you say, more demand but also more people going to tribunal and the whole sector is really struggling. And I think although the government's making some moves, but the reforms which were anticipated have, I think, basically been delayed for 2 years, really. So we do know that potentially in 2 years' time, or that there'll be continuing pressure, but it could become acute in the near future.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And we know that there's 2 national programmes now, which many local authorities have been made to be part of. We're not one of those local authorities. We're not currently in that position where we need to be part of those programmes, but those programmes are the Deliver and Better Value programmes and then the other programme around supporting local authorities with SEND. But you're absolutely right, this is a significant challenge nationally. The reforms in 2014 have really raised expectations of families and the funding to deliver those expectations has not been matched. I do believe it's about doing things differently and it's about making sure as many children as possible can be educated in mainstream schools because we know the chances of them getting 5 GCSEs and going on to meaningful post-16 education through mainstream education is greatly enhanced.
Thank you. I mean, there is, as behind all this similar to the NHS, there is a workforce issue because you can move the problem around, but you need the workforce somewhere, otherwise you're not really solving the problem. I think that's a key issue nationally, which they are trying to resolve, but it's not an easy issue. Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Leader. I suppose I want to follow on from what Councillor Bradwell had said, and that I really want to pay tribute and thanks and recognition to our officers and indeed councillors for that conversation that we've had, not just now, but more in the past, where a lot of times we could have been, and we were challenged to spend our reserves and put more money here or more money there. And we're not in this position where we are reasonably comfortable as far as this budget is concerned. It's not by luck, it's by judgment, and it's by judgment on by everyone. And the swans that glide across the top, known as Michelle and Andrew, are pedalling furiously underneath. And it's thanks to them that we're where we are. So we have services that we can continue to deliver. As Councillor Bradwell has said, there are other areas where they are not so fortunate. And as I say, it is not by luck that we are where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's fair. I mean, relatively speaking, we are in a very strong position, but we are not immune from all the problems and pressures we are facing. I suppose on that note, Glenn, I suppose just if you could summarise, although our government, to be fair, has given a reasonable settlement or fairly generous settlement this year, I just wonder if you could just outline the again, similar to children's, on the horizon there are some very choppy waters ahead. Probably.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, indeed. Short-term funding continues in adult social care, I'm afraid. The absence of a long-term sustainable funding base creates major problems, not just for this council, but all councils with responsibilities for social care. It also limits our ability to have long-term contracts, or where we do have those long-term contracts, introduces a risk, because government funding only goes up to a certain point. We do have a rather better settlement than we might have thought last autumn. It will allow us to at least cover off the inflationary and wider economic pressures in the market, which is probably the greatest area of concern for us. But it will run short of the ability to close the gap between public and privately funded care. That was one of the stated intentions. That won't be achieved, not just in Lincolnshire but elsewhere, and that's a large measure because the available funding just doesn't go that far. I think it's also fair to say that workforce pressures will continue. There is a particularly worrying trend across the country in terms of workers within the social care market. And pay inflation has not been resolved in a number of particular areas of employment. That's another area of challenge for us. It's difficult to see how that will play out on the medium-term financial plan. However, having said all that, the council is in a good position. We probably have one of the better relationships with our social care providers in the region. Despite the fact that it's a rural area and costs are significant, getting services to people, as they are in children's services, we probably are going to be fairly solid for the next year. After that, much more difficult to predict. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that. Councillor Betroyd, have you got anything to add? You haven't. How about you, Councillor McNally? No? So, I mean, obviously, I think the general sort of message coming out of these proposals is that thanks to a settlement which is was better than anticipated, we are probably in a slightly better position for this year than we anticipated. Although I think, as we've heard, with inflation still around 10% and hopefully coming down, and also the pressures we've heard about, I think that this hiatus of relative comfort, shall we put it like that, will probably not be long-lived. And it should be remembered that we are going to be using reserves in this budget, and we're also going to be finding £11 million worth of savings on top of the savings already in the process, which is probably twice that. So it's not like we're just we're just sitting back. We all, as always, are working very hard to make sure we balance the books, but also provide those services to which the public demand from us. So I suppose within that, as a one-off, if you like, there is some flexibility. What we're talking about with this budget for actually put some additional funding into the highways budget, particularly some issues which have come forward certainly from the public, and I know as councillors ourselves we are obviously have frontline contact with the parish councils and the public, and certainly in terms of the rural road network, but also things like getting what we call traffic regulation orders, getting certain things done, getting some extra pedestrian crossings, getting some of those smaller things done which are quite an irritant and a frustration, not only for local councillors but also for the public as well. So that's why we are now proposing this extra money to go into highways. So Andy, I don't know whether you can just summarise what the proposals will deliver for the public of Lincolnshire of this extra 7 million. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Leader. Yeah, as you've indicated, the package of measures reflects feedback that we received from local members in terms of how they engage with our local highway managers, long-standing sort of lists of outstanding activity. You've referenced traffic regulation orders. It's quite a labour-intensive process that's involved in that, and over the years we haven't necessarily put the same priority into that work as we've perhaps we've moved resources into other areas. So this will enable us to remove some of the backlog of that activity, dealing with sort of like new signs, new lining requirements in particular areas, parking restrictions, etc. The range of crossing proposals that have been brought forward again reflect information that's come out of ward walks between local councillors, the executive member and our local highway managers, reflecting local needs in respect to making areas safer for people moving around in their local community. So hopefully the package of measures will resonate on a local level, and people will be able to see the benefits of it at a very local level rather than just going into a more generalised maintenance programme.
Thank you, Andy. I do think that will be welcome, and we just need to make sure we keep on top of these issues while we have that flexibility. So unless there's any further... Yes, Councillor Betroyd.
Gone off again. Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to put my support to the TRO extra funding. It's something that at every parish council and every community I think we'll see the benefit from. It's I think it's really going to get rid of that backlog and hopefully deliver for our local villages and rural areas where I think a lot of these items have been outstanding for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments, please? Okay, we'll go to the recommendations, which will be amended as it has been circulated. I'm not going to read out all the amendments. They are basically just saying amending the recommendations for various reasons on paragraph 1, 3A and 5, which is basically saying amend it. So effectively we are amending the recommendations in English, shall we say, to put an extra £7 million as described just now by Andy Gutherson, the Director of Place. So, are we all clear on that? Everyone understand? Thank you. So all those in favour, and this is a recommendation just to remind you, to go to the full council a week on Friday, and then there will be a full debate, and obviously up for the council then to either accept these recommendations or amend them as appropriate, or put alternative budgets in, which I'm assuming there will be one coming, I'm guessing, but oh well. Councillor Dilks is keeping his cards close to his chest. Anyway, so the recommendations for us to recommend to the full council are laid out on paragraph 13 and amended to take account of the 7 million. All those in favour of those proposals, please show. I think that's unanimous. So thank you for that, and recommendations passed. And with that, I thank you for your attendance, and I close the meeting. Thank you.